Welcome to Lost Love Mystery, where every story unravels a secret. So, let's dive into another story. I first encountered Catherine, my wife, during our high school days. Our paths crossed a day before prom night, and since neither of us had a date, we decided to go together. I was captivated by her beauty and charm, and that's where our story began. After 5 years of dating, we tied the knot at a young age. However, Catherine struggled with alcoholism, and at one point she was involved in a drink and drive case. I stood by her side and helped her overcome her addiction. Despite the challenges, our family and friends always saw us as the epitome of a loving couple. A year into our marriage, our son, Adam, was born, and we finally became a complete family. It was everything I had ever hoped for. The only thing that seemed to be lacking was my earning potential. I worked for a government organization, and although it didn't bother me, my wife often expressed her dissatisfaction with our financial situation. She longed for a life of luxury and wanted me to take bribes to become wealthy overnight. But that wasn't the path I wanted to take. My wife came from a middle-class background, but she had a taste for expensive things. She remained as beautiful as ever. She was well aware of her beauty and took pride in it. She had a vast social circle consisting of affluent friends, and often attended their lavish parties draped in designer clothing or outfits purchased from high-end stores that she would return the next day. She was a self-proclaimed wannabe. Despite her materialistic tendencies, I loved her wholeheartedly, and she reciprocated my feelings. But things took a turn when I took her to an office party one day. As we got prepared for the event, my wife insisted that we call an Uberlux instead of taking the tube. Since Uberlux was expensive, it was out of our budget. My wife insisted that we couldn't take the tube because it would damage the expensive dress she had purchased and prevent her from returning it. She became upset, and I didn't want to ruin our evening, so I suggested we take an Uber ride instead. When the car arrived, my wife appeared displeased and accused me of being cheap. I tried to lift her spirits during the ride, but she remained upset. As we entered the party, my wife suddenly grabbed my hand and let out a fake laugh, which was one of her traits that I disliked. It always got under my skin, but I put up with it because I loved her. She was taken aback by the grandeur of the party with expensive wine and delicacies adorning every corner. My wife indulged in a few drinks, but I had to intervene before she could consume more and lose control. She had been struggling with alcoholism since her teenage years and had previously faced charges for drink and driving. My boss noticed us. His demeanor changed unexpectedly upon seeing my wife and me, but to my surprise, he appeared genuinely pleased. Though it struck me as odd, I attributed it to the occasion's significance. He welcomed us warmly and engaged in conversation, teasing that he had no idea I had such a stunning spouse. I took it as a compliment, and my wife was delighted to receive praise. As we chatted, I received a call from a colleague and excused myself. Upon returning, I noticed a shift in his behavior. When my wife informed me that she had invited my boss over for dinner the next day, I felt grateful for her kind gesture. The following morning, my wife woke up early and began to tidy up the house, which was a typical routine for her. But when she emerged from the dressing room wearing a deep neck dress that I had bought for our upcoming anniversary, I was taken aback. I questioned her choice of attire, stating that the dress was a little too revealing. She responded with annoyance, informing me that this event was more important than our anniversary. My wife scolded me for being too conservative and reminded me that a wealthy man was coming to our home, which could open doors to many opportunities. When my boss arrived for dinner, he brought gifts, and my wife graciously served us a meal. During the course of the evening, my boss presented my wife with a beautiful locket which she received with delight. She promptly removed the locket I had given her on her birthday and replaced it with the new one, causing me to feel a pang of sadness that she preferred the expensive gift over my heartfelt present. My boss had also brought along a watch for me, which made it less suspicious that he had given my wife such an extravagant gift. Once my boss had left, my wife couldn't stop praising him, and I had to agree that he was incredibly generous. My wife spent most of her days with our son, only leaving the house when I was around. to care for him. On our anniversary day, I decided to come home early and surprise her. However, when I walked into the house, it was empty, and I assumed that my wife and son had gone to the park or somewhere else. As I sat down to drink a glass of water, the doorbell rang, and I assumed it was my wife and son returning home. When I opened the door, I was surprised to see my neighbor with my son. She explained that she had to bring him back because my wife had to go somewhere urgently. I was confused about why my son had been at my neighbor's house in the first place and where my wife was. After thanking my neighbor for taking care of my son, I closed the door and asked him what was going on. He revealed that my wife was going away for a few days and leaving him with the neighbor, which seemed suspicious to me. Upon my wife's arrival, I inquired about her intentions, to which she revealed that she had something planned for our anniversary. Intrigued, I prodded for more information, but her response was curt and conveyed annoyance, stating that it was simply dinner. We readied ourselves and made our way to the restaurant, only to discover that it was one of the most expensive establishments in the city. Alarmed by the cost, I expressed my concern, but my wife hissed at me, urging me not to cause a scene. Finally, I followed her inside. My spouse entered the establishment and requested a table for two under the name Catherine. The receptionist verified that it was for Catherine and James. However, my partner began to behave strangely, becoming annoyed and claiming that the reservation was for Catherine and John. The receptionist double-checked but found no reservation under that name. My spouse left in a huff, complaining about the poor customer service without saying anything else. I reassured my partner that everything was all right, and we ended up having dinner at a nearby restaurant. My spouse remained silent throughout the encounter. After a few days, my boss began frequenting my office and appeared pleased with my performance. During one visit, he summoned me to his office and asked if I would join him for dinner at his home on Sunday. I was taken aback because my boss had never extended such an invitation before. Nonetheless, I accepted. When I shared the news with my wife, she became elated. Her reaction was akin to Cinderella being asked to attend the ball. I couldn't quite fathom why she was so thrilled. On Sunday, my wife and I prepared to go out. However, my wife strongly opposed bringing our son along, fearing he might cause damage. I wished to go as a family, but my wife's argument prevailed. As I couldn't afford a nanny, I sought a neighbor's help to look after our child. Upon reaching our destination, my wife stepped out of the car and walked ahead, ignoring my attempt to hold her hand. I assumed she was still upset about our anniversary dinner. Nonetheless, my boss greeted us warmly. Throughout dinner, my wife and boss conversed while I remained quiet due to being an introvert. This wasn't unusual since my wife is an extrovert. However, during the meal my mother called, but I couldn't hear her. I excused myself to speak to her, which took some time. Upon returning, I was stunned to see my boss's hand on my wife's face. I stood there in shock, but my boss explained that my wife had something in her eye. He said it so casually that I had no reason to doubt his explanation. During the dinner, my boss extended a job offer to my wife at our office, stating that she was the perfect candidate to be his assistant. Surprisingly, my wife accepted the offer, which was unusual since she had never expressed interest in working before. Consequently, we enrolled our son in a daycare facility, and my wife began working. Although I was pleased to see her working, she often disregarded me. I attributed her behavior to the new job, given that she had never worked before. After a few weeks, my boss promoted me, which made me happy. However, the promotion meant that I had to be in a different office for the first few days. Initially, I used to pick up my wife from work, but she insisted on going home by herself. One day, I decided to surprise her with a lunch date. However, upon arriving at her office, I discovered that she was not there. When I inquired with the senior assistant about my wife's whereabouts, she informed me that my wife had gone out with my boss. Despite calling my wife, she did not respond, and the senior assistant informed me that there was no meeting scheduled. Then I remembered that we both keep our location on, as per my wife's suggestion. I checked her location and discovered that she was at my boss's house, which made me a little suspicious. I decided to go there, but the security refused to let me in. I requested that they call my wife, and after a few minutes, she appeared looking at me. as if she had seen a ghost. I confronted my wife and inquired about her presence at my boss's house. She claimed that they had paperwork to complete. However, I noticed that a few buttons on her shirt were undone, and in that moment, I realized that my wife was cheating on me. I informed her that we needed to go home, and she followed me. During the ride home, my mind raced as everything started to make sense. Later, she told me that she had to attend a meeting with our boss outside the city. Although I wanted to lash out at her, I had other plans. I desired revenge. Despite feeling furious, I remained composed and reassured my wife that everything was okay, and I would take care of our son. On arriving home, my wife headed straight to the washroom. Although I desired to confront and shame her, I held back and focused on seeking revenge. I seized her phone and keyed in the PIN, and to my surprise, she hadn't changed it. I rapidly scanned through her messages and discovered that she was texting my boss. I took screenshots of their conversations and sent them to myself. Then I deleted our chat from her phone, and by curiosity, I scrolled through their conversation and found intimate photos of my wife and my boss. I couldn't help but wonder how long this had been going on. The rage inside me intensified, and I impulsively sent myself those photos before hurling my wife's phone against the wall. She emerged from the washroom, and I lashed out at her. Despite her pleas, I pushed her away and informed her that she would now know what it feels like to be broken. I stormed out of the house, drove straight to the office, and presented the evidence of their affair to her in front of my boss. Given the strict rules of the company, they took immediate action upon receiving the evidence. As a reward, I was given a bonus for exposing their affair. The company terminated their employment, and I proceeded to file for divorce in court. During the custody battle, my wife attempted to gain custody of our son, but I had evidence of her drinking problem. As a result, the court ruled in my favor, granting me custody of our son. However, my wife was permitted to visit him on weekends under my supervision. My son expressed his happiness in being with me as his mother neglected him and never paid attention. I was outraged by her behavior as she was too consumed with her desires to care for our child. However, our situation improved and my son and I lived contentedly. After a few months, I became fully engrossed in my work and was promoted to my boss's position. I attained everything my wife desired, but she eventually found out. On weekends when she visited our son, she attempted to seduce me and reconcile, but I had grown tired of her manipulations. My wife's actions caused her to lose all of her friends, and she now resides in a dilapidated apartment. Due to her past record, she has struggled to secure a respectable job.